A clear October morning in London, 2025. Imagine this. You're holding a cup of coffee and scrolling through your phone when every news alert starts yelling the same scary headline. But here's the twist. What if the person trying to save your city was just a cop on a horse? What if those 43 seconds I'm about to tell you about were the only thing that kept London from going completely crazy? I'm going to tell you a story that will make you doubt everything you see online. By the end, you'll never look at a police horse the same way again. Put on your headphones, get comfortable, and let me take you to Borough Market on a morning that started out like any other but ended with a heroic act that won't be written about in history books. As the city slowly came to life, the grey autumn mist hung low over the Thames like a blanket, wrapping around the old stones of London Bridge. The usual morning symphony filled Borough Market, vendors shouting prices for fresh vegetables, the hiss of espresso machines, and the soft clopping of hooves on wet cobblestones. Officer Arthur Pemberton adjusted his high-visibility jacket as he guided Valor, his chestnut gelding, through the narrow pathways between the market stalls. Arthur looked like someone who had seen a lot of the world's harsh realities at the age of 32. His time in the military in Afghanistan had left invisible scars, but it had also taught him to notice things that other people missed, like how shadows fell wrong, how crowds moved when something was wrong, and the small signs that something was about to go wrong. Valor snorted softly, and the cool air made small clouds of his breath. The horse was Arthur's partner in every way that mattered. They had been together for 3 years, ever since Arthur joined the mounted unit of the Metropolitan Police. Valor wasn't just a way to get around. He was also an early warning system, a crowd control expert, and occasionally Arthur's only friend in a job that could feel very lonely. "Easy, boy," Arthur said softly, stroking Valor's neck with a gloved hand. The horse's ears moved forward, always alert and listening. That's what made him special. Valor could feel when people were tense before they got angry, and he could tell when people were scared or angry in ways that no technology could match. Arthur's phone kept buzzing in his pocket. He took it out with one hand while holding the reins steady with the other. His landlord had called him 3 times and sent him a text that made his stomach tighten. Rent overdue again. Final notice. He closed his eyes for a moment and felt the familiar weight of money stress settle on his shoulders like a heavy blanket. His mother's heart surgery bills had used up all of his savings, and the salary from the Metropolitan Police wasn't enough to cover everything. He knew it was ironic that he was protecting one of the richest cities in the world while having trouble making ends meet. The phone rang again. This time, his mum called him on FaceTime. Arthur's face softened when he saw her face on the screen, even though he could see how worn out she was and how the hospital lighting made her skin look pale and fragile. "Morning, Mum," he said, trying to sound cheerful even though he was worried. "Arthur, dear, you look worn out. Are you eating well?" Margaret Pemberton's voice had that special mix of worry and love that only mothers have. "How are you doing today, Mum? Did you sleep well?" Valor moved a little behind him, and his ears turned like radar dishes. Arthur had learned to notice these small changes. The horse was sensing something, a change in the normal flow of the market. His mother said, "The nurses here are outstanding, but Arthur, I'm worried about the bills." "I know you're—" Arthur gently cut in. "Don't worry about that. Don't worry about anything. Just get better." Of course, it was a lie. Everything was left undone. But Margaret Pemberton had enough on her plate without having to worry about her son's money problems. A family of tourists came up slowly, with the kids pointing excitedly at Valor. Arthur said goodbye on the phone and promised to visit soon. Then he got back to his public relations work. He really liked this part of the job, seeing the kids' eyes light up when they saw Valor, answering their questions about police work, and being the friendly face of law enforcement. "Can we pet your horse?" a little girl with an American accent asked. "Of course. But first let me introduce you," Arthur said as he got off his horse. "Valor is very gentle, but you should always let a horse see your hand first, like this." Arthur saw that Valor's ears had pinned back a little bit as the family gathered around. Arthur knew every little thing his partner did, but he wasn't angry, he was just focused. The horse was paying attention to something apart from the usual sounds of the market. The new shopping centre near London Bridge Station was still being built in the distance. Over the past few months, the steady sound of pneumatic drills and heavy machinery had become a part of the area's soundtrack. But Valor's response pointed to something more specific. Arthur's radio came to life with a crackle. The dispatcher's voice broke through the morning calm. All units, be advised, an increased security alert level following unverified social media reports. Stay alert for any suspicious activity. The tourist family left, and Arthur got back on Valor, his mind now fully awake. There had been a lot of talk on social media about Operation Broken Crown over the past week. Most of the posts were vague and conspiracy theory nonsense, but Arthur had learned in Afghanistan that ignoring chatter completely was risky. Occasionally the most important information came from sources that didn't seem trustworthy. He led Valor to the river so that the horse could drink and Arthur could think. The Thames flowed by, carrying its usual load of tour boats and ferries for people who work. From here, London looked calm, eternal, and unshakable. But Arthur's time in the military had taught him that things could look very different from what they really were. Valor lowered his head to the water, but his ears kept moving, constantly looking for sounds that didn't belong. Arthur took out his phone and looked through the news feeds from that morning. The Broken Crown hashtag was popular, but most of the posts were broken up into bits, with strange messages, blurry pictures, and wild guesses about government cover-ups. He saw one post that caught his eye. A blurry video that looked like official papers and had a timestamp from just a few hours earlier. The sound was messed up, but he could hear parts of it, like compromised security protocols, and high-value target confirmed. Arthur frowned. He had found that real threats rarely made themselves known on social media, but the video seemed different from other conspiracy videos. There was a sense of urgency and a specific quality that made his instincts tingle. He was about to dig deeper when Valor suddenly raised his head out of the water, ears pointed forward, and nostrils flared. The horse had noticed something that Arthur's human senses hadn't yet picked up on. Arthur asked softly, "What is it, boy?" That's when he heard it. A noise that didn't quite fit in with the building work. It has a rhythm and a mechanical sound, but the frequency is different. In a way, Arthur's blood froze. It sounded like drilling, but not the way construction workers do it. That noise was exact and planned. The sound resembled what someone might make if they were attempting to access something that should have been out of reach. He led Valor to the source of the sound, and every sense was now very sharp. Arthur had the strong feeling that this quiet morning by the Thames was about to become a memory from a time when things were much easier. The noise stopped suddenly, leaving only the normal buzz of the city waking up. But Valor was still tense under him, ready for whatever came next. What do you do when the only person who sees the warning signs is the one person everyone else is taught to ignore? Arthur finds out that sometimes the most dangerous enemies are right in front of him in Part 2. By the time Arthur led Valor through the security checkpoint at Horse Guards Parade, the morning fog that had covered the Thames like a shroud was starting to clear. The annual Trooping the Colour ceremony was London's most important pageant. It drew tourists from all over the world and filled social media feeds with hashtags like #LondonSpectacle and #BritishTradition. Arthur adjusted his ceremonial uniform and felt Valor's muscles tense beneath him, but something felt very wrong about this morning. There was a lot of controlled chaos on the parade ground. Television crews were testing their gear, tourists were getting ready for the perfect Instagram shot, and mounted officers were lining up as they always do. The sound of military bands tuning their instruments and the excited chatter of international visitors made a symphony of excitement that should have been thrilling. Instead, Arthur was scanning the faces in the crowd with the same hyper-vigilance that had kept him alive in Afghanistan. Valor's ears moved all the time, picking up sounds that human ears couldn't. The horse had been acting strangely since they got there, shifting his weight and stamping his hoof on the old cobblestones every so often. Arthur had learned to trust these small signs. Valor's instincts had stopped more than one situation from getting worse in the 3 years they had been together. "Isn't it a beautiful morning for it, Pemberton?" Sergeant Davis yelled from across the formation. Davis was an old-school Metropolitan Police officer who had seen enough to be cynical but still enjoyed the ceremony and tradition. "Yes, Sergeant," Arthur said, but his eyes were on the press area where reporters were getting their gear ready. He noticed a man with grey hair and sharp features, who wore a press badge identifying him as Rowan Pierce from the International Herald. Pierce was carefully putting a sleek aluminum briefcase under the temporary bleachers, which were far away from the area where the press equipment was supposed to be. The briefcase itself wasn't strange, Journalists often brought expensive gear to these big events. Arthur didn't like how Pierce looked around before putting it down. The way he acted like he was just doing it on purpose screamed, "I'm lying." Arthur had learned to spot this kind of behavior in hostile areas, where the most dangerous enemies were often those who tried the hardest to fit in. Arthur told Valor to get closer, making it look like they were on a routine patrol while keeping Pierce in his peripheral vision. The so-called journalist had moved away from the briefcase and was now adjusting a high-end camera with the smooth movements of someone who really knew how to take pictures. But Arthur had seen the tiny smile of satisfaction on Pierce's face when he put the case down, the look of someone who had just finished an important job. "Control. This is Mounted Unit 7, Arthur said softly into his radio. "I think there might be a security problem in the press area. There's a briefcase that isn't being watched, and the owner is acting suspiciously." The answer came back right away. "Mounted 7, we see multiple bags that aren't being watched. Tourist season protocol is in effect. Unless you see signs of an active threat, keep doing your ceremony duties." Arthur held back his anger. Because of tourist season rules, security was so busy with real bags and equipment that they had forgotten about that. They had basically stopped looking into things unless they were actively smoking. This type of bureaucratic blindness allows the wrong people to exploit situations. The ceremony started with the usual fanfare, but Arthur was more interested in Pierce than the show. The man moved through the crowd like a pro, taking pictures that looked real to the average person. Arthur saw, though, that Pierce's camera was often aimed at security positions, exit routes, and other weak spots where crowds were thickest instead of the ceremony itself. Valor suddenly raised his head and flared his nostrils. The horse had sensed something that made all of his muscles tense up. It wasn't the usual excitement of crowd noise, it was real fear. Arthur could feel it through the reins. Valor's breathing changed, and his balance shifted slightly, which meant he was getting ready to fight or run away. "Easy, boy," Arthur said softly, but his heart was racing. He had learned in Afghanistan that horses could find explosives, changes in air pressure, and even people's emotions with a level of accuracy that most technology couldn't match. There was a real threat nearby if Valor was this upset. As the Queen's Guard started their traditional march, the crowd cheered and smartphone cameras flashed like strobe lights. Arthur could see tourists holding up their phones and streaming live to followers all over the world on social media. The hashtag Trooping the Color was already popular, with thousands of posts going up every minute. But Pierce wasn't putting anything on social media. Arthur watched him check a device that looked like a smartphone, but had an antenna setup that made it look like it was something more advanced. Pierce's fingers moved across the screen with the skill of someone who had performed this action many times before, entering a code or activation sequence. Arthur made a choice that would probably get him in trouble with his bosses again. He got off his horse and walked over to the briefcase, leaving Valor with a hand signal that meant "Stay alert, watch my 6." The horse's ears stayed locked forward, following Arthur's movements while keeping an eye on the crowd around them. The briefcase was pricey. It was made of carbon fiber and had combination locks that looked like they came from the military. There were no airline tags or ID stickers, so it didn't look like it was used for normal travel. The barely audible humming sound coming from inside, like electronics running on battery power, was even more worrisome. Arthur asked a nearby photographer, "Excuse me, is this your case?" Even though he knew it wasn't. The man said in a thick Yorkshire accent, "Never seen it before, mate. Been sitting there since before the ceremony started. I thought it was some journalist stuff." Arthur pressed the button on his radio again. "Control, Mounted 7. I need EOD to check out this briefcase. I can hear active electronics inside, but I can't see the owner. It's in a favorable tactical position. Mounted 7. We've had 12 calls like this morning. Unless you can see explosive devices, EOD is busy with confirmed threats. Keep doing your job." Arthur's jaw clenched when he heard the dispatcher say dismissed. He'd heard that same bureaucratic brush off in the military, usually right before things went wrong. He was a constable with a horse, not a bomb disposal expert, and his bosses had made it clear that gut feelings weren't enough to stop big events. Arthur went back to Valor, who immediately pressed his nose against Arthur's shoulder. Such behavior was a sign of both love and worry. The horse could tell that Arthur was upset and was trying to comfort him in the way that animals do, by being there and paying attention to him. The ceremony went on around them, But Arthur started to make a mental map of ways to get people out and places to control the crowd. His military training was kicking in. This part of his mind automatically calculated how far the blast would reach and how many people could die. If the briefcase had what his gut told him it might, the high number of people around would make any incident terrible. Pierce had moved to a spot where he could clearly see both the briefcase and the main VIP viewing area. Arthur saw that his camera now had what looked like a telephoto lens that could zoom in a lot, even though he was still taking pictures. More importantly, Pierce kept looking at his watch nervously, like someone who was racing against the clock. Arthur's phone buzzed with a text from his mum that read, "I am watching the ceremony on BBC. Can you see yourself on TV, love?" He smiled quickly and typed back, "Keeping London safe, Mum. Love you." But Arthur's mind was racing through all the things that could happen as he sent the message. The briefcase, Pierce's actions, the electronic humming, and their positioning could all be innocent on their own. The way they worked together made his combat-trained instincts scream warnings. The noise from the crowd changed all of a sudden, and Arthur looked up to see Pierce quickly walking toward the exit, leaving his post and his camera gear behind. Security was preoccupied with the ceremony and didn't notice the man's departure. Arthur made another choice that his bosses wouldn't like. He told Valor to follow Pierce while staying out of sight of the suspect. They moved through the crowd like shadows. Arthur was on horseback, which gave him the height he needed to follow Pierce through the sea of tourists and locals. Pierce was walking toward Westminster Bridge at a steady pace that made it look like he was leaving but not running away. Arthur saw that the man had thrown away his press badge and camera, going from being a journalist to an unknown pedestrian in a matter of seconds. Valor's ears were still pinned forward, and he was staring at Pierce with the intensity of a predator stalking its prey. The horse's instincts confirmed Arthur's suspicions. Pierce's actions were not typical news coverage of a royal ceremony. The radio crackled, alerting all units to unconfirmed social media reports of suspicious activity at ceremonial events. Maintain standard vigilance protocols. Arthur thought it was too little, too late. Pierce would be long gone by the time the bureaucracy realized there was a threat, and whatever he had done would be permanent. As they crossed Westminster Bridge, Arthur saw Pierce disappear into the crowd of morning commuters. He blended in with the office workers and tourists as if he had always been just another face in London's endless stream of people. Arthur had seen enough, though. The briefcase, the way he acted, and the time all added up to something that his gut told him was far from over. Arthur couldn't shake the feeling that what he'd seen was just the first move in a much bigger game as he turned Valor back toward their patrol route. The ceremony concluded smoothly, yet Arthur's genuine investigation had just begun. In Part 3, our mounted officer will learn that not all threats come with explosions. Occasionally the most dangerous weapons are the ones that attack the truth itself. After trooping the color, Arthur should have been doing routine paperwork and checking equipment, but he couldn't stop contemplating how Rowan Pierce had moved on purpose or how happy he had looked when he put down that briefcase. Arthur's mind was already working on the problem like a military intelligence puzzle as he led Valor through the cleanup after the ceremony at Horse Guards Parade. He was connecting dots that his superiors had thought were just coincidences. At the Westminster Police Station, the usual pile of incident reports and administrative forms dominated Arthur's desk. But instead of dealing with the paperwork, he sat in front of his computer with his fingers hovering over the keyboard, thinking about whether to follow up on his suspicions or let them go. The smart career move would be to forget about Pierce and focus on his assigned duties. It felt entirely different to do the right thing, though. Arthur used his mod-secure access credentials to look for footage of the ceremony in the Metropolitan Police's CCTV database. Typical of government technology that had undergone multiple upgrades but never truly improved, the system was sluggish. Arthur's phone buzzed with another text from his landlord while he waited for the search results to load. This text message was more threatening than the previous one. Final notice before eviction proceedings. Payment required within 48 hours. The stress of money felt like a weight on his chest that made it difficult to breathe. He had already maxed out 2 credit cards to pay for his mother's medical bills, and his Metropolitan Police salary wasn't enough to cover both his bills and her care. He knew it was ironic that he was looking into possible threats to national security while also facing eviction from his 1-bedroom flat in Bermondsey. "Arthur." Sergeant Davis' voice broke through Arthur's thoughts. "Why do you look like someone stole your horse?" Arthur was able to smile weakly. Just the usual, Sarge. Paperwork and bills. Davis walked up to Arthur's desk, and his expression changed to one of understanding. Listen, son. I know things have been challenging since your mum's surgery. If you need to talk to someone about programs that can help you with money. Thanks, Sarge. But I'm fine, Arthur lied. He had already looked into every program that could help him. The Metropolitan Police had resources for officers in trouble, but they all came with strings attached, like counseling sessions, performance reviews, and the kind of scrutiny that could end a career. The search of the CCTV footage was finally over, and it showed dozens of camera angles from the ceremony that morning. Arthur went through them one by one, looking for clear pictures of Pierce and how he moved. What he found made him feel sick. The video showed Pierce moving through the crowd with ease, but what Arthur saw after he put down the briefcase was even more disturbing. Pierce had gone back to the case twice, once to change something inside and once to look at what looked like a digital display. The way the man moved was too planned and professional to be innocent. Arthur made the picture clearer and zoomed in on Pierce's hands. The so-called journalist was wearing surgical gloves, which is not unusual for someone who works with expensive equipment. But when you add that to everything else, it looks like they were trying to avoid leaving fingerprints. Arthur's screen showed a new message notification, and what he saw made his stomach drop. The alert came from a system that keeps an eye on social media for possible security threats. It showed him something that shouldn't have been there. A video of Metropolitan Police Commander Sarah Whitfield apparently admitting to corruption and plotting against the Crown. Arthur clicked on the video, and his hands shook a little as he watched what looked like his respected superior officer explain a plan to weaken British institutions. The video was great, the sound was clear, and Whitfield's mannerisms were spot on. But Arthur had worked with Whitfield for 2 years, and the way she looked was off, too controlled, too perfect, like an actress playing a role instead of someone making a real confession. The video was already getting many views. The hashtag Broken Crown was trending all over the world, and social media sites were full of comments and shares. The story was shocking. A top police officer admitting to being part of a plot to bring down the monarchy. Arthur could see that the story was starting to spread through the news, and he knew that a media firestorm was about to start that would destroy everything in its path. Arthur's military training had taught him to look for things that weren't there, like the micro-expressions that make human communication real. Whitfield's face in the video moved perfectly, but it lacked the subtle imperfections that made real human emotion believable. The affair wasn't just a scandal, it was a very advanced deepfake. Arthur's radio came to life. All units, be advised. Metropolitan Police Command is implementing enhanced security protocols due to the developing situation regarding senior personnel. Maintain operational readiness. The dispatcher's voice was full of panic, even though the language was official. Arthur realized that he was watching a complex attack on British institutions happen in real time. The weapon wasn't bombs or regular terrorism. It was engineered truth meant to destroy people's faith in the very foundations of law and order. He took out his personal phone and called Whitfield's direct line, hoping against hope that she would pick up and confirm what he thought. The call went straight to voicemail, which meant she was either in meetings about the crisis, or had been told to stay quiet until the situation could be looked at. The facial recognition system sent an urgent alert to Arthur's computer. The search had found additional footage of Pierce, this time from cameras near Camden Market. Arthur's heart raced as he saw Pierce meet with someone he didn't know in what looked like a planned exchange. The quality wasn't outstanding, but Arthur could see Pierce getting something that looked like a USB drive from someone whose face was hidden by shadows and a baseball cap. The meeting place was important because Camden Market was less than 2 miles from the Westminster Studio Complex, where several major news networks had their London offices. Pierce would need access to broadcast facilities or high-speed internet infrastructure if he wanted to make more deepfake content. Arthur made a decision that would probably end his career if he was wrong, but could save it if he was right. He copied the CCTV footage to a secure drive and wrote an initial intelligence report detailing his suspicions regarding Pierce and the connection between the briefcase incident and the deepfake video. Valor's unique whinny echoed from the stable area below the station as he was formatting the report. Arthur had learned to understand his partner's different sounds, and this one sounded like a warning call, like the sound Valor made when he noticed something that didn't belong in their environment. Arthur put on his jacket and went down to the stables, where he found Valor pacing back and forth in his stall. The horse's ears were pinned back, and he was acting the same way he had during the ceremony that morning. But they were safe in a police station, not at a public event where there could be thousands of threats. Arthur slowly walked up to the stall and asked, "What is it, boy?" Valor quickly went to Arthur and pressed his nose against his partner's chest in a way that showed both love and communication. Arthur had learned to pay attention to these times when the horse was trying to say something without words. When Arthur ran his hands along Valor's neck, he saw that the horse kept looking toward the place where the mounted unit kept their special gear. Arthur looked where Valor was looking and felt his blood freeze. Someone had been in the storage space. The lock was still in excellent shape, but Arthur could see scratches around the mechanism that made him think someone had messed with it recently. The inventory sheets inside showed problems. A few things were missing, like C4 explosive charges that were used for training and clearing buildings in an emergency. The hashtag Broken Crown was spray painted on the wall in fresh black paint, which confirmed Arthur's worst fears. Pierce wasn't the only one working on the deepfake video. It was just the start of something bigger and more dangerous. Arthur called his superiors right away to tell them about the discovery, but the response was typical of bureaucracy. With the Whitfield scandal dominating everyone's attention, a few missing training explosives seemed like a lower priority. Arthur was told to write a report and wait for more orders, but as he stood in the storage area, looking at the graffiti and thinking about Pierce's professional movements, Arthur realized that the criminals might be counting on him to wait for instructions. The real threat was getting ready for something that would make the deepfake video look like a warm-up act, while the authorities were busy with the scandal. Arthur went back to his desk and opened up social media monitoring feeds. He watched in real time as the fake Whitfield video spread across platforms like a virus. The comments were getting more and more angry, with demands for investigations, resignations, and worse. The deepfake effectively undermined trust in institutions and sparked potential chaos. But Arthur had seen this playbook before, in Iraq and Afghanistan, where the enemy would create confusion and send people in the wrong direction before launching their real attacks. The question wasn't if something bigger was coming, but when and where it would happen and if Arthur could figure it out before it was too late. As the afternoon wore on, Arthur found himself creating a timeline of events, connecting Pierce's movements with the social media campaign and the missing explosives. The pattern that came out was complicated and scary. A planned attack meant to destroy people's trust while putting physical assets in the best places for maximum effect. Arthur was running out of time to convince people that the real threat wasn't what they saw on their screens, it was what they didn't see in the shadows. In Part 4, our mounted officer will learn that the most dangerous enemies are sometimes the ones who are right in front of them, and that saving London might mean breaking some rules. When most of London was still asleep, the Westminster police station felt different in the early morning hours. Arthur sat at his desk, the glow of multiple computer screens illuminating his worn face as he worked through the night, cross-referencing CCTV footage with social media timestamps and building a case that his superiors seemed determined to ignore. More than 3 million people had viewed the fake Whitfield video, and 17 countries were trending the hashtag Broken Crown hashtag. What had started out as a clever campaign to spread false information was quickly turning into a full-blown crisis of public trust. During these sleepless hours, Arthur found it strange to have Valor in the stable below. Arthur had gotten into the habit of taking short breaks every hour to check on his partner. Each time he did, he found that the horse was getting more and more agitated. Valor's sharp senses were picking up on something that Arthur's human senses couldn't quite understand, but the horse's constant warnings were impossible to ignore. Arthur's phone buzzed with another automated payment reminder from his credit card company, and then right after that, he got a text from the hospital billing department. His mother's heart surgery had gone well, but the costs that came after were too much for him to handle. He found it ironic that he was attempting to prevent a terrorist attack in London while struggling to pay his own bills to keep the lights on. His second monitor showed a loop of CCTV footage from Camden Market that demonstrated Pierce meeting with the unknown person. Arthur had done everything he could to improve the picture quality, but the second person was still frustratingly difficult to see. He could see that the exchange was professional, there was no small talk, no unnecessary contact, and it looked like a USB drive, and maybe other small items were being quickly passed between them. Arthur had searched through every database he could find for Pierce's picture, but the man was in that grey area of international journalism where credentials could be faked and backgrounds could be hidden. On the surface, Pierce's press credentials looked excellent, but Arthur's military intelligence training had taught him that the best covers were the ones that were technically correct but fundamentally misleading. The deepfake technology being used was more advanced than anything Arthur had seen while serving in the military. The fake Whitfield video wasn't just believable, it was flawless. Every little change in his face, voice, or gesture was just right. The only signs were small differences in lighting and the uncanny valley effect, which made watching for a long time a little uncomfortable. Arthur opened the facial recognition software and started running the improved Camden footage through every database he could find. It would take hours, but it was his best chance of finding out who Pierce was in touch with. Arthur focused on the missing explosives from the police storage facility while the system was working. There was a small but important difference in the inventory: 3 blocks of C4 training explosives, along with remote detonators and timing devices. Officially, the missing items were being investigated as a potential clerical error or misplaced training materials. Arthur knew that the #BrokenCrown hashtag with graffiti on it linked this theft directly to Pierce and the ongoing campaign of false information. Routine overnight dispatches crackled on Arthur's radio, but something in the normal flow of police communications chilled him. Traffic Control Sergeant Zara Patel said that there were strange patterns of traffic congestion in central London because of several planned protests and counter-protests all happening in the same places. People said that the protests were natural reactions to the Whitfield scandal, but the timing and organisation made it seem like something more planned. Arthur put on his jacket and went down to the stables. He needed Valor's calming presence to help him think clearly. As soon as Arthur walked in, the horse came up to him and pressed his nose against his partner's chest, which was their usual way of saying hello. But Valor acted differently tonight, more urgent and more demanding. Arthur asked, "What is it, boy?" while he ran his hands along Valor's neck. "What do you want me to know?" Valor turned to the stable's ventilation system, and his ears moved like radar dishes tracking a certain frequency. Arthur noticed that Valor was focused on sounds beyond human hearing, such as electronic signals or high-frequency communications indicating the presence of surveillance or coordination equipment. Arthur hurried back to his desk and pulled up building plans for the parts of central London where the protests were going to happen. If Pierce and his friends were planning something more than just spreading false information, they would need strategic spots where they could see clearly and get away easily. The fact that the explosives were missing made it seem like whatever was coming would be meant to have the biggest psychological effect, not the most deaths. The facial recognition search was finally over, and Arthur's heart raced when he saw the results. It was found that Pierce's contact from Camden Market was Elena Vasquez, a former Spanish intelligence officer with ties to international mercenary groups. Vasquez had a lot of experience with psychological operations, electronic warfare, and urban terrorism. Arthur quickly marked Vasquez's ID in the system and started following her around London using the city's many security cameras. What he found confirmed his worst fears. Vasquez had been placing herself in key areas of the city and doing what looked like reconnaissance missions at major infrastructure points, government buildings, and media facilities. His phone rang, and it showed his mother's number. Arthur paused to consider his response before answering. He knew his mother could always hear stress in his voice, but he didn't want to ignore her call when she was so sick. "Arthur, love, I saw the news about that police commander. Terrible business," Margaret Pemberton said in a weak but worried voice. "It's not what it seems, Mum." "Someone's trying to make trouble," Arthur said, keeping his voice steady even though things were going crazy around him. "Dear, you sound tired. Are you taking care of yourself?" Arthur shut his eyes and felt the weight of his duties pressing down on him. His mother was recovering from major surgery and needed both financial and emotional support from him. He might have been the only person who could stop a terrible attack on London. "Everything is fine, Mum. I'm just working on something important." "How are you doing today?" "The nurses say I'm getting better. But Arthur, I'm worried about the medical bills." "I know you." Arthur gently cut in. "Don't worry about that. Everything is taken care of. Just focus on getting better." Arthur stared at his computer screen after the call ended, feeling the weight of his situation. He was a constable who rode a horse and was facing what appeared to be a complicated international operation. At the same time, he was having trouble paying his bills and taking care of his sick mother. Movie heroes never had to worry about paying their rent while saving the world. Arthur opened the social media monitoring feeds and watched as the fake Whitfield video spread in real time. There were a lot of conspiracy theories, calls for violence, and extreme political views in the comments section. The deepfake did exactly what it was supposed to do. It made people lose faith in institutions and caused social chaos that people with malicious intentions could take advantage of. Arthur began to discern a pattern in social media usage that others had overlooked. The first shares and comments on the fake video showed timing and language patterns that looked like they were from bot networks and paid influencers. The viral spread wasn't natural. It was being boosted by a complex propaganda machine. Arthur wrote down everything he found in a detailed intelligence report. This included the CCTV footage, the missing explosives, the identification of Elena Vasquez, and the study of the social media manipulation campaign. The report made it clear that there was a planned attack meant to weaken British institutions and set up physical assets for a later operation. He sent the report through official channels, but he also sent copies to people he knew from his time in the military who might be able to get around red tape. Arthur knew that his career and reputation were at stake, but he couldn't just sit back and watch London burn while he filled out the right forms. The sound of Valor's whinnying echoed through the stable area, and it was more urgent than Arthur had ever heard it before. He ran down the stairs to find his partner pacing back and forth, ears pinned back, and eyes wide with worry. The horse was acting in a way that showed it was aware of an immediate threat, which was something Arthur had learned to trust completely during their time together. Arthur looked at his watch. It was 4:47 a.m. In less than 12 hours, the planned protests would all be in central London, which would be the perfect cover for whatever Pierce and Vasquez had been working on. The missing explosives, the false information campaign, and the strategic positioning all pointed to an operation that would have the biggest effect when the city was at its weakest. Arthur stood in the stable, feeling Valor's tension and watching the first signs of dawn come through the windows. He knew that the next few hours would decide not only his future but maybe even the future of everyone in London. The government didn't see the threat, the media was spreading the wrong story, and the real danger was getting ready while everyone was looking the other way. Arthur made a choice that would either save his job or end it for good. He started getting ready for the chance that he and Valor might be London's last line of defense against an enemy that was skilled at making the impossible seem like it was going to happen, and the truth seem like a lie. Arthur was about to learn that in some battles, the truth can be more dangerous than weapons. In Part 5, our mounted officer and his loyal partner will face their toughest challenge yet, as London teeters on the edge of chaos. Arthur got the call that would change everything just as the morning sun was starting to break through London's always grey clouds. Mounted 7. We've got eyes on your suspect Pierce. Camden Market, northwest entrance. He's mobile and appears to be carrying surveillance equipment. Sergeant Patel's voice crackled through the radio, cutting through the usual morning chatter. Arthur's heart raced as he quickly got on Valor. The horse could tell that his partner was on high alert. They were patrolling the Westminster area when the call came in. Reaching Camden Market would take at least 15 minutes due to London's already busy morning traffic. Arthur had learned during his time in the military that 15 minutes could mean the difference between stopping a disaster and cleaning up after one. Control. Mounted 7 is responding to Camden Market. Estimated time of arrival is 12 minutes. Arthur radioed back, knowing that Valor could reach the location faster than any patrol car could navigate through London's narrow streets and pedestrian areas. Arthur's mind raced through the information he'd gathered over the past 72 hours as they made their way through the waking city. Pierce was more than just a terrorist. He was a skilled operative using the latest deepfake technology to weaken British institutions while positioning physical assets for what looked like a planned attack. The missing C4 explosives, Elena Vasquez's involvement, and the viral spread of the fake Whitfield video all pointed to an operation meant to have the most psychological effect. As they got closer to Camden Market, Valor's hooves rang against the wet pavement. The horse's ears kept moving as he took in the complicated symphony of city sounds. Arthur had put a GoPro camera on his helmet that morning, partly to gather evidence, and partly because he had learned that the only way to get bureaucrats to take threats seriously was to document them. The market was just starting to come to life as the first vendors set up their stalls and the first tourists arrived, coffee cups in hand, looking for the best Instagram shot. Arthur saw Pierce right away. The man was standing next to a shipping container that had been turned into a vintage clothing stall, but he wasn't looking at the clothes. He was systematically photographing the market's layout with a professional-grade camera equipped with what appeared to be a telephoto lens. Arthur got off the horse and walked up, keeping Valor close but letting the horse move through the crowd on its own. Pierce was acting like a spy, carefully noting sightlines, escape routes, and possible choke points as if he were planning an operation. "Excuse me, sir," Arthur said, with his hand resting casually on his radio. "Can I talk to you?" Pierce turned, and Arthur saw a brief look of recognition on the man's face before it was replaced by a practiced look of innocence. "Of course, officer. Is there a problem?" "Just routine security checks," Arthur said, noticing that Pierce's grip on his camera case had gotten a little tighter. "Do you mind if I ask why you're in Camden this morning?" "Tourism photography," Pierce said without missing a beat. "I'm researching London's cultural diversity for a global magazine article." Arthur, on the other hand, had seen something that Pierce probably thought was hidden, a small earbud in the man's left ear and the sound of voice communications that were barely audible. Pierce wasn't on his own. He was getting real-time updates from someone who was watching the conversation happen. Arthur was about to ask more questions when Pierce suddenly ran away, moving with the smoothness of someone who had planned several ways to get away. The man jumped over a low barrier and into the maze of market stalls. Arthur had to make a split-second decision that would either prove his suspicions right or end his career. "Go, Valor," Arthur shouted, and his partner quickly understood how important it was. What happened next was a chase scene that would have seemed impossible to anyone who didn't know how mounted police work in cities. Valor moved through the busy market like a trained athlete, weaving between stalls and tourists who were surprised. Arthur leaned low in the saddle, and his GoPro camera recorded every second of the chase. Pierce was quick and clearly knew the layout of the market, but he didn't think about how a police horse chasing him would affect his mind. As Valor thundered past, his hooves struck sparks from the concrete, and crowds moved out of the way without thinking. Arthur guided him through turns that would have been impossible for a patrol car. The chase went from Camden Market to the streets around it, where Pierce's urban parkour skills became clear. The man climbed walls, jumped over barriers, and used construction scaffolding to get higher while Arthur and Valor chased him relentlessly below. The horse's better stamina and Arthur's tactical experience kept them going. Arthur's radio crackled with news from other units trying to get to their location, but London's morning traffic was making it harder for regular police to do their jobs. As the chase went through King's Cross, past the tall glass facades of new development projects, and into the narrow streets of historic neighborhoods, only Arthur and Valor were able to stay in touch with Pierce. Pierce suddenly changed his plans and ducked into what looked like an abandoned construction site. Arthur followed and got off his horse as Valor's hooves made a scary noise in the small space of a building that was only partially finished. The sound of their chase had attracted the attention of construction workers and people walking by. Arthur could see people holding up their phones to record what was happening. That was when Pierce showed his true colors. Instead of running away, he turned to face Arthur with a smartphone in his hand, the camera on it pointing right at them. But the handset wasn't just any phone. Arthur could see professional lighting gear and what looked like a small broadcast transmitter. Pierce said, "Ladies and gentlemen," in a voice that sounded like a professional performer, "you're witnessing the harassment of a real journalist by the same corrupt police force that has been exposed in recent revelations." Arthur was horrified to learn that Pierce was streaming their fight live, turning the chase into a show meant to make the Metropolitan Police look bad. The man's earlier flight wasn't panic. It was choreography that put Arthur in a place where any aggressive action would be recorded and shown to the world. Arthur could see that the live stream was already getting many views, and the number of comments was going up quickly as Pierce kept performing. "This officer has been following me for days, and it's clear that his corrupt bosses want to stop independent journalism." Arthur was in a situation that he couldn't get out of. He had good reasons to arrest Pierce based on the CCTV footage and the missing explosives, but anyone who only saw a police officer talking to a journalist who seemed to be peaceful would have thought that he was being violent. Pierce kept broadcasting, making himself out to be a victim of police state oppression and subtly urging his viewers to share the stream and spread the story. Arthur could see the number of people watching going up, 10,000, 20,000, 50,000, while Pierce used social media to attack the very institutions Arthur had promised to protect. This is exactly the kind of behavior that Commander Whitfield exposed in her brave confession, Pierce said, referring to the deepfake video that had already hurt people's trust in the police. They'll do anything to protect their corruption, even sending police on horseback to scare journalists. Arthur's training kicked in, and he made a smart choice. He would let Pierce keep performing while he filmed everything instead of trying to arrest him in front of the cameras. The GoPro on his helmet was filming Pierce's actions, his gear, and most importantly, how complicated his broadcast setup was. "Sir, you can go back to work," Arthur said calmly, knowing that the camera would see him holding back. "I was just doing my regular security checks as part of our ongoing work to keep London safe." Pierce looked surprised for a moment that Arthur wasn't being aggressive, but he quickly got back to his story. And there you have it. When faced with citizen journalism, the police go back to their talking points. But Arthur had reached his main goal. The chase made Pierce show what he could really do and what he wanted to do. The livestream showed that the man had high-tech gear and professional-level propaganda skills. Arthur had also written down where Pierce was and how he acted, which was useful information for predicting his next moves. Arthur got back on Valor and was about to leave when he saw something that Pierce probably didn't know was on camera, a reflection in a nearby window showing Elena Vasquez watching from a hidden spot. Pierce's contact was still in London, still working, and still in touch with him, even though they were being watched. The chase through Camden had shown Arthur the full extent of the operation he was up against. It wasn't just about fake videos or missing bombs. It was a complex psychological warfare campaign meant to shake people's faith in the government while getting ready for something much bigger and more dangerous. Arthur could still hear Pierce's broadcast as he and Valor rode away from the construction site. The audience had grown to over 100,000 people. The man was using social media to turn his fame into another weapon against the people who were trying to stop him. Arthur's radio crackled with urgent traffic from control. "All units, be advised. Social media reports of police harassment are trending worldwide. Prepare for increased public scrutiny and potential hostile encounters." Arthur knew that even if he lost, Pierce could turn it into a tactical victory. The chase was over. The real battle was in the digital world, where truth and fiction could be mixed so well that video evidence could be used as a weapon. Arthur had shown that Pierce was doing something wrong, but the enemy had used that to attack people's trust again. In Part 6, our mounted officer will learn that the weapons that make heroes look like villains can be the most dangerous, and that he may have to give up his own reputation to save London. After the Camden chase, it felt like the eye of a hurricane, calm on the outside but dangerous forces building up on all sides. At 6:30 a.m., Arthur was in the briefing room of the Westminster Police Station. The conference table displayed his full intelligence report, resembling the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that assembled to form a frightening picture. Detective Inspector Sarah Chen went over the papers with the carefulness of someone who had learned not to ignore what field officers said, but Arthur could see that her co-workers were not sure. D.I. Chen said, "This is great work, Constable Pemberton," in a carefully neutral voice. "You've written down a lot of surveillance activities, found international operatives, and linked what looks like a planned disinformation campaign with threats to physical security." Arthur felt a rush of hope. Finally, someone in charge was paying attention to his investigation. There was a clear and present danger that needed to be dealt with right away. The CCTV footage of Pierce's meetings, the missing explosives, and Elena Vasquez's identification. But Chief Superintendent Williams, a bureaucrat who had worked his way up the ranks by staying out of trouble instead of confronting it, was already shaking his head. "The problem, Pemberton, is timing. The Whitfield scandal has put a lot of pressure on the Metropolitan Police. The media is watching everything we do. Social media is calling for investigations into police corruption, and the Home Secretary wants us to be held accountable." Arthur was deeply troubled by the recurring pattern of institutional paralysis. The deepfake video of Commander Whitfield did exactly what Pierce wanted it to do. It caused so much controversy and attention that real police work became impossible. "Sir, with all due respect, that's precisely what they want," Arthur said. The disinformation campaign is meant to keep us from doing anything while they get their real assets in place. Every hour we wait allows them more time to finish whatever they're doing. Williams and the other senior officers exchanged glances, and Arthur could see the bureaucratic math happening in real time. If Arthur's information led to action, it could prove his investigation right, but it could also go horribly wrong if the operation went wrong or if Pierce's livestream story got more attention. Williams said, "The decision has been made to classify your findings as preliminary intelligence that needs more verification. We'll be working with MI5 and Counter-Terrorism Command to look at the threat assessment over the next 72 hours. 72 hours. Arthur felt like the words hit him in the face. Pierce and Vasquez weren't working on bureaucratic schedules. They were professionals carrying out a plan that was already well underway. The missing C4 explosives, the high-tech gear, and the planned social media campaign all pointed to the fact that they were in the last stages of their operation. Arthur said, "Sir, I think they're going to do something today." He tried to keep the desperation out of his voice. The protests, the media coverage, the timing of everything, it's all a sign that an attack is about to happen. Arthur could tell, though, that no one was listening to what he said. The senior officers had already made their choice based on politics instead of strategy. Committee reviews and agency talks would overshadow his investigation, leaving Pierce and Vasquez to carry out their duties. Arthur was officially praised for his thorough preliminary investigation at the end of the briefing, but he was also told to go back to his regular patrol duties. The message was clear. People liked his work but didn't trust it. Arthur went back to the stable area feeling worse than he had since the worst days of his recovery from military service. Valor could tell right away how his partner was feeling. He pressed his giant head against Arthur's chest to comfort him and show that they were together. The horse's warm breath and steady presence gave me a momentary sense of stability in the storm of anger and helplessness. Arthur whispered, "We were so close, boy," as he ran his hands through Valor's mane. "We knew what they were up to, we had the proof, and they're just going to put it away while London burns." Arthur had learned to understand Valor's soft whinny as a sign of worry and support. Valor had been with him through every step of the investigation, and the bureaucratic betrayal hurt even more because Valor was always there for him. They had put everything on the line to keep the city safe, and now they were being pushed aside when it mattered most. Arthur's phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "Saw the news about that chase on the BBC. Are you safe, love?" The worry in her message made Arthur think about everything he had to lose, including his job and the chance to help the one person who had never doubted him. He was about to answer when his phone rang. The call would change everything. When Arthur saw traffic control on the caller ID, he knew right away that it was Sergeant Zara Patel calling, even though her tone was tight with stress and urgency. When Arthur kicked down the door to the abandoned Soho studio, it felt like a tomb. Valor's hooves struck the concrete floor, producing metallic echoes that reverberated through the vast space. There were exposed beams, hanging electrical wires, and shadows that seemed to swallow the weak afternoon light coming through the dirty windows. The building had been gutted for renovation months before. Arthur's eyes were drawn right away to the middle of the room, where Pierce stood next to a high-tech control station that looked like it belonged in a military command center. The setup was more complicated than anything Arthur had previously considered while researching it. There were many monitors showing live social media feeds, news broadcasts, and what looked like remote surveillance footage from different parts of London. But the big industrial drone was the most important thing in the scene. Its carbon fiber frame was covered in cameras, transmitters, and, most terrifyingly, 3 blocks of C4 explosives attached to its undercarriage with the same precision as military ordnance. When Arthur walked in, Pierce looked up, and his face went from surprise to something that could have been admiration. "Constable Pemberton," he said, his voice calm and satisfied, as if he already knew what he was going to do. "I have to admit, I didn't think you would be so persistent. Most people would have given up when their bosses didn't listen to them." Arthur got off his horse but kept one hand on Valor's reins. Having the horse there gave him both a tactical advantage and an emotional anchor in a situation that felt unreal. The GoPro camera on his helmet was still recording, which could be important proof if he lived through the next few minutes. "It's over, Pierce," Arthur said, his voice steadier than he felt. "I know who you are and what you're planning, and backup units are already on their way." Pierce smiled, but his face was cold and calculating. "Constable, this is just the beginning. Do you see those monitors? Over 50 million people have watched the fake Whitfield video in the last 48 hours. People are calling for police reform, government investigations, and public protests on social media. Your chase yesterday has been turned into a piece of propaganda showing police harassment of journalists. Arthur's heart sank when he realized how big of a problem he was facing. This case wasn't just about bombs or physical terrorism. Pierce had turned information into a weapon, making truth a casualty of war and public opinion a battlefield where facts could be made up at will. But the real masterpiece, Pierce said, pointing to the drone, will be the live broadcast of this facility being destroyed by what looks like a police cover-up operation. Corrupt officers are already destroying evidence to protect their conspiracy, setting the stage for the story to unfold. The explosion will be filmed from different angles and streamed live to all major platforms at the same time. Arthur looked at the timer on Pierce's control station and felt his blood freeze. The countdown displayed 43 seconds, and the numbers decreased in a very precise manner. 42 seconds, 41, 40. Arthur said, "You're crazy," as he thought about the distances and options with the tactical mindset that had kept him alive in Afghanistan. Blowing up this building won't prove anything except that you're a terrorist. Terrorism is such an old idea, Pierce said, his fingers hovering over what looked like a dead man's switch. Controlling narratives, shaping perceptions, and making people doubt everything they think they know are all parts of modern warfare. If this building collapses and the footage reveals police drones in the vicinity, it will utterly destroy trust in British institutions. 37 seconds. 36. Arthur knew that normal strategies wouldn't work this time. Arthur couldn't get to Pierce in time because he was too far away from the bomb, and any aggressive action could set off the dead man's switch right away. But Arthur had an edge that Pierce hadn't thought of, a partner who could move faster and more accurately than any person. Valor, Arthur said quietly, using the soft voice commands he had learned over the years they had worked together. Water protocol. In case of emergency. Valor's ears perked up as he thought about what to do. The horse immediately turned toward a nearby fire suppression station on the wall, understanding exactly what Arthur needed without requiring any further instructions. They had practiced emergency procedures for several situations, such as when they had to quickly turn off electronic devices. 28 seconds. 27. Pierce saw Valor move, but he didn't realize how important it was. "Constable, your horse won't help you. This place is protected against." Valor's giant shoulder hit the fire suppression station like a battering ram, breaking the glass housing and sending a huge amount of water and chemical suppressants flooding into the room right away. The industrial sprinkler system turned on, and streams of water poured down on the electronics, while Pierce rushed to protect his control station. 22 seconds. 21. Arthur moved as the chaos broke out around them. His military training kicked in as he made his way through the spray of water and Pierce's frantic efforts to keep his equipment under control. The electronic displays were flickering and not working because water was getting into their circuits, but the drone's timer kept counting down. Pierce lunged for a backup detonator, but Arthur was quicker, knocking the man to the wet concrete floor and sending the device flying across the room. They fought in the water that was quickly rising to a few inches deep, with Pierce using the strength of someone whose whole mission was falling apart around him. 15 seconds. 14. Arthur broke free from Pierce's grip and dove toward the drone, feeling around for manual controls or an emergency shutoff. The device was military-grade, but Arthur's EOD training in Afghanistan had taught him that all explosives had weaknesses. He found what he was looking for, a number of wires that connected the timer to the explosives. 10 seconds. 9. 8. Arthur took out his utility knife, and even though he was full of adrenaline, his hands stayed steady. Arthur saw that the connections were color-coded, but not in a way that he recognized from his time in the military. At this point, luck and gut feelings were more important than knowledge. 7 seconds. 6. Arthur picked the blue wire, which looked like it was the main signal line between the timer and the explosives. His blade cut through the insulation and copper core in one clean motion, breaking the connection just as Pierce yelled in anger and despair from across the room. 5 seconds. 4. The timer kept counting down, but the explosive stayed still. Arthur had stopped the detonation sequence 4 seconds before it was supposed to happen, but the timer kept moving towards 0. 3 seconds. 2. 1. Nothing. The timer went off with an electronic beep that echoed through the waterlogged studio, but the C4 charges were still just harmless blocks of putty stuck to a broken drone. Pierce fell against the wall, and all of his plans and expensive equipment were ruined by water. The weight of what had just happened struck Arthur as he stood in the water up to his ankles, breathing heavily. He had stopped a terrorist attack that would have not only destroyed a building but also people's faith in the institutions that held British society together. The 43 seconds that had seemed like forever were over, and London was safe. Valor walked through the standing water, and his giant presence was a comforting reminder that Arthur hadn't been through this crisis alone. The horse nuzzled Arthur's shoulder, which was a sign of both love and congratulations that meant more than any official recognition could. Arthur's radio came to life when backup units finally showed up. Their voices were worried and urgent. "Mounted 7, what's going on? We're getting emergency signals from your area," Arthur said. "Control, this is Mounted 7. His voice was hoarse but steady. "Situation under control. Suspect is in custody. Explosive device is disarmed. We are requesting bomb disposal and forensic teams to collect evidence." When Pierce was taken away in handcuffs, still talking about stories and information warfare, Arthur knew that their fight was far from over. The fake Whitfield video was still going around, social media was still full of false information, and it would take time to rebuild public trust. But for now, London was safe, and that was enough. Arthur looked at Valor, his friend and partner who had made the difference between success and failure. In a world where truth could be made up and reality could be changed, the honest loyalty of a police horse was still something that couldn't be faked or changed. Although the 43 seconds had come to an end, Arthur understood that the true task of safeguarding London's future had just begun. And so ended the most terrifying 43 seconds in London's recent history. There were no explosions or destruction, just the quiet bravery of a mounted officer and his horse who refused to let fear win over duty. But what secrets would that weird QR code show? That's a story for another time.